Morning, all.
Skura, greetings.
Morning.
Morning. Morning, morning.
What's it like in Durban this morning?
It's quite nice, actually.
Cloudy but beautiful.
Oh, it's dark and
Nice,
cold and
nice,
rainy
quiet,
here.
nice, quiet morning. Yeah.
Good, good, good.
Yeah.
Hi, Karuni. She's here too. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Karuni. Yeah.
Morning, everybody. How's it, Skura? How's it, Thomas?
Morning, Adima.
Morning,
Hi,
Karuni. Did I see Paul
Morning, Ken.
on there? Paul, are you on there?
Morning, morning. Hello, Summers. Morning.
Hi, morning, morning.
I see a Paul Phillips on the register, Summers. Yeah.
Can you see him, Adima? Okay.
Hello,
Oh,
Paul.
say hello,
We
Paul.
see you.
Hi
Morning,
there.
Summers.
Can you hear me now?
Morning, morning.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Doing good. Okay, sorry. It's fairly early here.
Oh, it
What
is your
time is it
connection,
there,
Adima,
Paul?
remember.
It's an hour behind.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for joining in. Today we have Thomas Govender, who heads Arctic 4 in Glenwood. He has been a colleague of mine when I was still much young architect for many, many years at Stas Foster. He's well experienced in heritage retail and entertainment projects, both here and in the USA. So he takes over Arctic 4, which has a very long-standing history in Devon. Thomas, would just like to hear your journey this morning. Over to you.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to start sharing the screen now. I probably should. So Kiara, if we can do that.
Okay, thanks. You can share, Thomas.
So then make sure sharing sound. Okay. Just want to see that you can. Second.
Then just go slideshow so that it's the full page. Oh, full screen, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Morning all. Thank you so much for getting up this morning and making time to listen to me. Hopefully I'll make it worth your while. I didn't want to speak too much about myself. I felt that it should be more about the architecture, but some of you that are attending said that I should. So I will say a few things about myself. If I don't, I suppose nobody else will. So just a short background. I come from a very humble background. My parents were born in Cato Manor, but forcibly displaced. And my dad built this house. So this is the house that my dad built in Reservoir Hills. It's a suburb just below Westville North. And this house was built in the 60s. In those days, there was nothing around. So we were one of the first people that moved into the area. He did very well in completing this project or this house at the age of 25, and it was bond free as well. So it was quite a feat at the time, and something that he was proud of. My parents were both very smart, but suppressed. Yet we were very proud and independent. My siblings and I are all well educated and good contributing members of society. We sought solace from all things ubiquitous and depended only on frugality to forge the way forward. And this became the ethos of my life. Just a little bit about me becoming an architect. Throughout my life, I always painted and I could draw. In fact, I was known for it. I could do that very well. But you wouldn't find me painting or drawing in any specific corner in the house. I wouldn't do that as a pastime. It wasn't something that I would do for fun. Instead, I would make things. Now, if you see that picture that I just went through now, there's a huge bush around the house, and that bush was there for most of my childhood. It was the most amazing place. I could find bush reeds, wood, all kinds of amazing things. And I used to make stuff. I made a lot of slings, bows and arrows, guns with nails, all kinds of nasty things. But I enjoyed most making kites, all kinds of kites, Japanese kites, and so forth. But the most important thing about all of those structural things that I would make is that it must be extremely balanced and I must do the twinings perfectly. And I really enjoyed that. So and this is a trend that carried on throughout high school, and I realized that I probably should be an architect or an engineer, maybe more an engineer at the time. And it was a difficult decision for me, but in the end, because I could draw and I could paint well, I felt that the better option would be architecture, which is a good compromise between the two. Fortunately, at the end of matric, I was awarded a scholarship, and that scholarship was for engineering, civil engineering. But I managed to convince my scholars to allow me to study architecture, and it is, so I was very grateful for that. Architecture at University of Natal in the early 90s was an absolute culture shock. It was just a difficult time. South Africa was transforming. It was a very trying time, and I, because I struggled with the culture and the differences in the culture, I struggled through those initial 4 years, but I got through it. And then I went on to work in '95. I worked for Mbali Swana. During '95, my mom passed away from a long battle of cancer, and that galvanized my stance as an independent person. So I went on to forge my own independence. In that year, I was very fortunate to have been awarded the second scholarship, and this one was for an ambassadorship to United States. I would have to go to United States for 2 months and preach Africa, and then come back and preach America. So that was the first time I flew. Went off to Baltimore, Maryland, and I worked for a company called Development Design Group. They did malls in South Africa and throughout the world. The two in South Africa was Rosebank and Cavendish, and their fierce rivals across the road was RTKL. RTKL had a hand in our Gateway mall here. So I came back to South Africa, finished final year, and then went off to work again. And I worked for Storch Foster and a bit for Johnson Murray Architects before I went back to United States, where they offered me a job, and I went to work for DDG again. And during that time, in that year, I just felt it so difficult to wear the Star Spangled Banner. I just wasn't American enough. And I missed South Africa. I really missed the ground smell of it, the smell of the ocean, everything Africa. My roots were in Africa. I needed to come back, the beer, the curry, the Durban, everything. It's just amazing. And I had to come back. So I decided to come back to South Africa. And when I came back to South Africa, I continued to work for Storch Foster Architects. Fortunately, all of these companies kept their doors open to me, and I'm very grateful for that. I continued to work for Storch Foster, and in 2001, I married Nirvana, my longtime sweetheart, and today we have a beautiful daughter. Her name is Senkita. She just keeps me on my toes, and she's everything to us. Whilst working at Storch Foster, I realized that I needed to be on my own 2 feet. I needed to trade, but I had zero business acumen. So I went on to study an MBA, and I finished that in 2006. And then I went off and tried to open up my own company and start my own stint. But during this time, I also worked at Public Works. And it is during that time that I started to realize I could probably make the biggest difference with what I have to offer in rural areas. It's something that has always been close to me. Just making people's places, people who are less fortunate, just to try and work in those kinds of environments. So In 2008, I merged with Arctic for Architects. And I just want to go through a little bit of history on this company. 30 years ago, in October 1988, two KwaZulu-Natal officers, Olaf Pretorius Smith and Poole, and Becca Hoffman joined forces to bridge the divide between Durban and Port Shepstone. And the Arctic for Architects partnership was formed. The Margate office was founded in the 1980s. The Durban roots originated in 1953 under Olaf Pretorius. The wonderful ink sketch that you see on the screen in front of you was done by one of the stalwarts of Arctic 4, Ian Poole, and this was done in 1978. So this is Durban in 1978. We're very proud of the sketch. It was apparently done over a weekend and on ink and paper and then blown up and then just replicated to a gigantic size. This picture still hangs proud above our reception desk in the office. So if ever you come visit us, you can still see this picture. Arctic 4 completed several high-rise buildings in Durban, CBD, such as Sanlam Center, FedLife Building, Durban Bay House, and the Embassy Building, which you see up on the screen at the moment. And more recently, we finished the Port Shepstone Hospital Regional Multi-Department Core Block. We've done a lot of work in this hospital precinct, and we're busy with another large project toward the rear of it. It's a psychiatric ward. It's just been with us for a long time. And some of you that are not in the office will still remember this project. It still hasn't landed ground yet, but we're getting there. The company has always taken projects in rural areas, and our commitment to improving communities in rural areas remains steadfast. And so today we carry this torch forward. At this point, I'd like for Amar to open your camera. I want to introduce the office as we are today. And maybe Paul, you can show yourself as well. Do I need to stop sharing?
We can see the office. Is that the camera by Amar Kusal?
Yeah, we have.
Okay,
Yes,
so-
we see that.
There
Yes.
you go. So that's everybody back there. So back there, you can see a cross section through the office. That's Neville, Jack, Kiara, Wes, Amar, Dash. I can't see it very clearly. I think that's Clairville, Blessing, Malusi will be around there somewhere. Nirvana, probably bobbing around somewhere in the background there. Paul, I'm not sure if you showed yourself up on screen. This is the office at Arctic for the moment. We're not a large office. Not everybody is in the office yet, so it's not yet 8 o'clock. But we're still going strong. Okay, can I get back? Okay, our architectural statement. Our architecture tends towards modernism, probing for a local vernacular in building profile, local aspirations, and material selection. When I last spoke, it was for the SAIA KZN Parlor series. This was some time back, and it was titled Modernity in the Berea. It was an exercise where I explored Sri Lanka and I talked about Jeffrey Bawa's work on tropical modernism. This talk is a follow-up in application and is titled Modernity in the Berea. It's an architectural exploration of modern regionalism in two classic buildings. The project speaks of where we are today. It really stems from my search for identity. When I first started this talk, I talked about my difficulty to assimilate with the cultures at university and my difficulty to navigate my way through university as a result thereof. And then I went off to the United States and I equally felt like I didn't belong there. When in India, I would be called South African, but in South Africa, I am called Indian. So what am I? And this is the question that's plagued me for a while. And the exploration of regionalism is to connect with my South Africanism. And I think this is something that we should all do. And it's very important in architecture throughout the world today. So the practice is in the process of becoming part of a precinct named Greenhouses, located at 44 and 46 Lena Arles Road in Glenwood. The properties are neighbored by two historic listed buildings. This is a Victorian Gothic Revival church, which is now converted into a gym. And on the other side is the Methodist church. Our two buildings are these two, which are the lighter brown color, and the listed buildings alongside it, which are Edwardian type buildings. The existing footprint of the grouping of buildings are set back from Lena Arons Road. So there's Lena Arons Road, and there's geographic analysis. All of these buildings are set back, and they are just submerged in the sleepy green suburb. So what this creates is a historic enclave, and that was part of the motivation for making these into offices with special consent. The idea is to try and repurpose these buildings. It's very difficult to take up residence in the area. The area has changed in character a lot. So the best fit we felt for it going forward is to make them into offices, and we repurpose this building. But there's an exercise that we followed to try and address these other questions of regionalism. So some of the planning process that we went into it is to address and identify all of the vistas down Moore Grove, which is at the rear of the property, Lena Arons Road, vistas from down Berea Road, linkages between these buildings, linkages in front of the buildings, and a way to try and take these introverted colonial buildings and open them up to the spaces outside. And we'll slowly talk about how that evolved into tropical modernism and our way of addressing regionalism. The buildings themselves that were built were very respectful. The idea was for the buildings to sit very quietly in the neighborhood. They weren't intended to stand out as icons or something large or something that wants to stand out above everything else. So it's not very modernist from that point of view. It's very subdued, very quiet, and it's meant to fit in as opposed to stand out. So you see the scale of the other buildings. This is across the road from Lena Arons. These are the flats at the back. And the same for the second building. And the buildings haven't changed much in scale. It's just modest additions that have been done to them. So these are some of the first sketches that we had done of the buildings. And once again, you can start to see the two types of buildings. This is a Union building, and that is an Edwardian building. It's worth noting that these two buildings were not listed. So the application process wasn't as arduous as it would have been if we were listed. And I believe they weren't listed because the Union building shares a lot of the characteristics of the Edwardian building, and the Edwardian building shares a lot of the characteristics of the Union building. So these buildings are transitional in nature. And that very same ethos is what we've tried to carry through in its transition now into an outdoor-indoor type of environment synonymous with tropical modernism. This is a scale of the intervention or the clip-on building that we've added onto the back of the Edwardian building. We've done very little to the front, and we'll show you that as this presentation goes. And in it, there's a very modest building juxtaposed against a very classical building. These styles are period correct. The modernist building is, heralded from the Bauhaus movement. It's devoid of style and so forth, and we'll talk about that as well just now. But the podium section is something that is intended to read more with the local vernacular and local culture. So the top is talking about two simple buildings, or two types of buildings that were period correct in the 1920s. And when juxtaposed against each other, we start to see that dialogue of these buildings that coexisted at the time. And the simplicity of the modern building is intended to showcase the classical building in this particular case. The front of the buildings are largely left untouched. These buildings are intended to be left this way because they're historic buildings. It is part of the historic fabric, and we don't want to mess around with it too much. We did, however, add a screen to the Edwardian building and we removed the Union type brick balusters from it, the upper floor was glazed in. The one thing that we've noticed about upper floor balconies is it's just a dust collector. Nobody ever goes to them, nobody ever uses them. It might be a haven for a smoker, but that's it. Now that we've enclosed it and put in full height glazing doors, people go in, it's a chill space, it's a relaxing space, it's a space that everybody wants to go to, and it's very usable at the moment. When you open up those doors and you open it up to the trees and so forth, the sky foliage just comes into the building and it's really an amazing space. So I'm showing this very quickly to you, and then I'm going to explain how we've brought in the regional aspects into it. Now, this is the building as were before any additions were done. This is some of the sand and stuff stocked on the side. And then it developed into a brick module system that we've used in. You'll notice there's a Flemish bond. And later we'll talk about how that Flemish bond contributes towards the culture and how it's used to pop out to make pattern making and so forth. And then that podium was first built, as you see it at the bottom in this last slide. That podium is starting to show the brickwork patterning that's coming in. The brick that's been used in there is recycled brick, and the brick came from a building that was demolished up the road. So once again, one of the parts of this talk is about sustainability and recycling and reuse and so forth. Get into the next one. So this is, in essence, how the podium above it was started to be constructed. And I'll later expand about what those materials were and why we selected them. And it was also an exercise to explore different types of materials. The reason, one of the primary reasons that we've chosen to present this project as opposed to many projects is to explain what we would do to a building if we were the client and what we would experiment with to understand what happens to materials in the Durban environment, especially new materials. And this is cladding that went onto this lightweight steel box. It's large, and we'll talk about that as well as the project, as the slide goes on. And that's what the box on top of the characterful podium looked like when it was completed at that stage. So this is really the early stages of this design. One of the things that you also note as we go through is that most of the materials are recycled, reused, and secondhand. So this is the west elevation of the very same building. This is during the day and during the night. And you'll start to notice the scale of these buildings relative to the buildings around it. And this is the building in a larger context at day and night, starting to pick up the scale of the building and its ability to just sit quietly, even though it's lit up, and the play of shadows, the play of lights. The building is lit up from the outside onto the building as opposed to throwing out light, which just is a distraction in the end. We quite enjoy the shadows and so forth that come out of it. This is a vista from down the street, looking up towards what the building was like in the very beginning, before any additions. And this is how it grew in with the timber box. And you start to see its relationship with the Edwardian building. You start to see that timber box being clad with so its relative finishes, and we'll talk about that a little later, and its relationship with the Edwardian building. And that's the box now with the Siberian larch from down the street, and its process of getting completed slowly. So that's what it looks like at the very beginning, and this is what it looks like now. Once again, it's a celebration of shadows. It's an exploration of light onto different types of materials and projecting all of the bifolia and the trees and plants, and that is supposed to showcase everything that's around you. the idea and the intention in the end is to make this building fit in as quietly as possible into this suburb street. You're going to see further more of these and how its relationship with the street is and its quietness, and it's not intended to be in your face or bolder than it needed to be. So this is the before and after east elevation, which is the front of the building. So this is the Edwardian building with the brick balusters in front of it before any renovations were done. And this is it after the renovations. What it's done in essence is created a screen that we could simply use, and we use it a lot now in that enclosed veranda space. It works a lot better because there's a better engagement with the outside, and people tend to sit out there even if they're alone. And the upstairs has been converted into a boardroom now, or a sort of crash space, and people are using it a lot more. I talked about that a little earlier about balconies on first floors. I just want to show you quickly this video of how that screen was constructed, and you'll also note that the screen is made from blue, which is recycled. Some of them have stripes in them, and some of them are plain. And we didn't matter to us, and we designed the frame so that it allowed the planks to be put in smaller pieces. The pieces needed to be small like that because then we could get value for money. I bought these in bundles, and we had them in various sizes. So when you cut them up into smaller pieces, you're going to use more often. And that was one of the primary reasons that we've done it like this. Yeah, that is up for you. Okay, so when we start to look at those timber screens, the amount of shadows and shade that we come out of them, just amazing things that have happened serendipitously. That screen is a little set back from the glazing, and you'll see further shots down the road internally of how that screen allows one to open up those big glass doors and then stand outside and pretty much touch the frangipani tree on the outside. That's an attempt to try and bring a person closer to the courtyard at ground space. This is our idea of genius loci and trying to find the spirit of the place. So this was quite a serendipitous result with the way the shadows came out of it. The relationship with the screen and that building and with the biophilia is very evident with these pictures. And you could pretty much stand in the office, stand and touch the frangipani flowers, as well as allow that smell of the frangipani flowers into the office, and it just blends into the office and vents through the office. So it's quite a pleasant place to be in, as a place of work. This is the front veranda behind the screen at night, and above it you're going to see steel balusters, steel burglar guards. And these burglar guards came from the original building, and we repurposed them, put some chains in them, hung them from the ceiling, and we put in a whole lot of pot plants. These pot plants are lovingly taken care of by Blessing and Tebo, who take them off, water them, put them in the sun, and then put them back again. And this is very much like a bonsai plantation, the amount of care that goes into it. You'll notice that the benches have a lot of scuff marks in them. That's from all the braais that we have. We have no managers in the office except for one, and that's Wes. He's the manager of good things. He's in charge of the braais, so I'm sure he's smiling at the moment. We have lots of these braais. So you can pop by anytime you want. Well, not anytime you want. Come pop by on the last Friday of the month. We'll have a braai and you can come join us. The idea of tropical modernism. Now, the first talk that I did was about Bawa, and I went across to Sri Lanka to understand what tropical modernism and how courtyard architecture works. And so I wanted to just move forward now is to explain why this building is more than just that box that's clipped onto the classical building. I'm going to just read a few things here. So colonial buildings are in essence introspective, which suit colder climates, and that was simply planted in South Africa. Modernism preferred to indulge in abstract form making, ignoring the specifics of the site and context, and developing general solutions to universal problems rather than specific designs for particular places. But these styles are not place considering. Genius loci, or spirit of place, talks about place as an extension of nature. It's this idea of dwelling within an inside place as an extension of nature outside that has led to the exploration of courtyard architecture. This type of architecture in our environment appears to be an obvious fit. And to find out more, I went to Sri Lanka and in search of Bawa to understand tropical modernism. So this project attempts to put that learning into action. One of the most profound things that I've found from my understanding of courtyard architecture is that a lot of people would come into a glass house with a nice big glass door, and the nature outside is let into the house. And so the idea behind that rationale is got this big glass door so that the outside comes in and the nature is inside the house. Well, courtyard architecture is slightly different. Courtyard architecture for me means that you're outside and now you feel like you're in a place that you need to bring the inside out. So now you are in a defined space, but you're outside. And I think if you creating courtyards and if you don't engage directly with the inside and allow that interrelationship to happen so that a person is encouraged to walk through the outside more freely, then that courtyard needs a bit of rethinking. So I'll get through the next slide. This is a section through the building, the new build that's clipped onto the Edwardian building, and it goes into the Union building. Now you'll notice that there is a sunken courtyard space with where this cursor is at the moment. The frangipani is out here, and that's the screen from which you can touch through the office. So this is the office space, you go through the glass door, you stand out there and you touch the frangipani. The idea is to try and link a person through that tree into the courtyard. The reason I say this is because one of the difficulties with genius loci is that man has a relationship, or humankind has a relationship with the earth. And if you're not in contact with the earth, then you are not in that courtyard space and you are in a disconnect. So having that tree or a raised garden is an important part of this design, an important part of to retain it. That tree was something that could have been taken out, and you'll see later how it poses in the driveway, but we drive around it because it's more important to have that tree there. So that tree then links a person from the office space into this courtyard space. Now, the nice thing about that tree is people from the office are still coming down there and standing around this space and chilling and relaxing, which means it's encouraging you to come outside. And that's the idea of tropical modernism. Now, this is stage 2, this courtyard space. We're currently living in it. Unfortunately, we're still squatting in there. I'm trying to finish the new house of the building in Morningside, and once that's done, then only we can move out of here. So this is the only space left that makes this house a private house. The rest of it opens up and it becomes part of the office complex. So I can't start any work on this until we move out. But the idea is to start to encourage people to move from under the frangipani tree down a set of stairs and into this courtyard space, and we'll show you that as the project, as this talk develops. I'm just going to take you through some of the construction processes that we went through. That courtyard space, we're looking from the back of it, the Union side of the building toward the Edwardian building. This is what it was like before nothing was there. And then it developed into the box. It's not a very imposing box, but the scale works quite nicely with the tree and then the courtyard, which is sunken in the foreground of it. And that's the cladding that went onto it. The cladding was intended to have a pattern in it, but the pattern seemed to have been lost over the years. In the frangipani, there's also louvers that we've been added to it, and I'll explain those louvers a little later because they are bespoke louvers and they can be moved about depending on the person the sun is affecting on the inside. So that's the build as it's progressing, and this is where it is currently at the moment, and I'll show you some better graphics of that as we go. And this idea is to try and keep the building seated quietly and its relationship with the colonial structures. There's no competition. There's just an exhibition of each other in a in a low-key manner. So that's what this courtyard looks like at the moment during the day and at night. This black space here is louvers that we have bespoke made, and those louvers can be simply clipped out and moved around dependent on the sun that's coming in. So there's a winter sun and the morning sun, and then that just controls the environment on the inside. So the construction process of the interior space is such now. I will talk about this lightweight steel structures under new materials and how we tested it in our Durban coastal environment and why we selected it. This is a span of well over 10 meters, and we didn't want any columns in between. We just wanted a large open space, very simple space, and it's more about trying to bring the outside in or the inside out in this particular case. So we wanted to keep the box as nondescript as possible. And that is the space as it's starting to get finished. Even the flooring is recycled Oregon pine with the border intact. It's just part of the fabric of the house anyway. This is the space as it's developing and getting completed. And this is the space as we see today. Now you can't actually see these louvers that are in the screen. These louvers were made bespoke and can be unclipped and moved around, and we can move them just to make sure it doesn't get into Western space during the summer and the winter. And that's quite a versatile product that we put in there. We've also got entertainment. We try and keep the space as light as possible. It's work and play, and trying to make it a home away from home. This is the vista down the side of the building. Now, this is where the frangipani tree is, and that tree is very imposing, but it is somewhat tucked into the side and has a relationship with the courtyard down here. Eventually, an opening is going to be put into this area here. We can drive past it, it works, and based on that, there was no way we're going to take that tree out. It was too important to be part of this precinct. So that's based on some of my notes. The next slide talks about integrating the forecourt. Now, this is part of the same tropical modernism ideology of courtyard architecture. The first courtyard is a closed space between buildings, the space that's supposed to be inviting, where you're outside and you're inviting the inside out. This is a forecourt, is more open. It's not necessarily not inviting, but it's trying to bring the two buildings together, try and make them less introverted, and trying to encourage the biophilia to encourage people to come outside and just be under the canopies of trees. Now, an important topic is culture. I'm going to just quote a few things in here. So Walter Gropius said that Bauhaus was entirely apolitical and was marked by the absence of ornamentation and by harmony between the function of an object or a building and its design. This became the new international style that influenced modernism throughout the world, which aims to shrug off international borders and usher in new world order of austerity, simplicity, and pragmatism. This, however, ignored regional context from place to place. According to UNESCO, heritage is our legacy from the past, what we live with today, and what we pass on to future generations. Culture can be defined as all the ways of life, including arts, beliefs, and institutions of a population that are passed down from generation to generation. The culture can be called the way of life for an entire society. As such, it includes codes of manners, dress, language, religion, rituals, and art. Now, according to Wikipedia, classical architecture, which is what these two buildings are, colonial in nature, denotes architecture which is more or less consciously derived from the principles of Greek and Roman architecture of classical antiquity. Norberg Schultz postulates that character is determined by the material and formal construction of a place. Venturi further elaborates that usually character of a family of buildings which constitute a place is condensed in characteristic motifs, such as particular types of windows, doors, and roofs. Such motifs may become conventional elements which serve to transpose a culture from one place to another. So colonial buildings in KZN were in many ways a result of industrialization of components and its transfer from England to KZN. To establish local character, we looked at a process of local cultural inclusion in the form of patterns, motifs, styles, materials, construction techniques, etc. The importance of architecture as an expression of heritage and culture reflects the very backbone of the intended people's identity. The role of the architect is to consider a modern regional response to historic building intervention reminiscent of the transition from classic to modernism. A worthy topic in South Africa to open barriers and rewire the topic of one of inclusion. An inclusive process to ensure that the very essence that makes this historic building special is not lost. So it's also inclusive of the historic nature of the building. For effective transformation from house to office, the design has considered the actual users, which consist of a multitude of cultures endemic to our society. A variety of cultural inclusiveness is adopted in materials, patterns, colors, and style in the building fabric itself. So I'm just going to go very quickly through how that evolved in our building. So recycled brick and pattern making. This brick was being found in a building that was demolished just up of St. Augustine's Hospital. It's a beautiful pinkish salmon brick that we managed to salvage, brought it across, cleaned it, laid it down in a Flemish bond, bringing in the colonial part of its character, and then allowing some of them to pop out, as you can see where the cursor is. And that is very much pattern making, which is inclusive of so many cultures in South Africa, not just our Zulu cultures. There's an appreciation of concrete that will weather with all of its imperfections, and I want to also talk about that in a statement later about imperfection and why it's important to be allowed to develop its own patina. And all of this is on show. So there's moss, there's patina, there's labor-intensive work, there's pattern making, there's Flemish bonds, Flemish bond brickwork, and all of this is done by local laborers. So these are reflecting the very people that live in our society. Then get to the next slide. Now, this is a stained glass that I managed to salvage. I'm a bit of a salvage hunter. It's one of the few vices that they allow me in the office, so I get to spend some money buying stuff. I've salvaged this stained glass window from the proof area. We repurposed it in our building. There wasn't actually stained glass in it. It was a sliding sash window, which was quite a state. So we put this in there and we thought it really worked quite nicely in the classic part of the building. In the modern interventions of the building, we've included modern stained glass, and this one was a commissioned work of art by a local stained glass artist. Her name is Sue Knight, and she did this for us. Just an amazing piece of work, very, very commendable. The same happened for the entrance door. This particular door was salvaged from the Point Waterfront. The hand that made this glass door is light years better than the hand that made the outer frame of the stained glass around it. But it's showcasing itself anyway, and we felt that even though it doesn't match in color and in style, it still looks beautiful in front of it. Now that is a celebration of the classic part of the building. So there was no exclusion of the classic from modern. It was trying to marry them both together. At the opposite end of that walkway is another stained glass door in the same Piet Mondrian style type. of art, also done by Sue Knight, and that transitions into the modern part of the building, which is in the opposite end. So there's a distinct separation as to what goes where. Zulu baskets. These Zulu baskets, or fishing baskets, or stylized fishing baskets, were found in the St. Lucia estuary. We brought it back and we repurposed them, and we made them into downlighters, and we just showcased them in the space, and we believe it brings an ethnicity to that particular space. Another basket that was found in the Victoria Street Market, and that is in the entrance lobby, which you may have noticed in the previous slide. Just an absolutely great find. This is the picture of our starting graphic, and this is actually a picture that Amar took of these baskets, very stylized lighting, very, very beautiful. So in here, we talk about other cultural things. We talk about what it looks like at night, how the shadows work onto the patterns that have come onto the brickwork. It showcases still the Flemish bond. It showcases the shadows onto the timber. It's a very low scale type of building. The kind of plants that are in that garden range all the way from marigolds, which gets into an orange colored bush, some local wild purple flowers, and then you're going to get the lemongrass and a tree, a religious basil. That religious basil is specifically chosen because it's also in Hindu terms called the Tulasi or Tulsi tree, and so that's also part of an Indian contribution towards the cultural makeup of this building. In the middle of this shot, you will see a sari. This I found in our wardrobe, one that Nirvana wasn't using anymore. And I put it in there just to cut out the glare that was affecting Belusi at the time. That's like West Sun that just beats into this elevation. And that's also trying to add to the cultural mix that's within the office. So there's representation of all the cultures within the office. And this third slide in this one is the juxtaposition of a Art Deco cupboard, which is also salvaged from another project that I've been working on. And we've also showcased these tightly Zulu baskets we made from the Lala palm, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. If you're not familiar with the Zulu baskets, then please go and visit Panzi Museum, Mikula's office in Glenwood. There's a whole lot of them in display. There's absolutely beautiful things that I think should be incorporated in most of our architecture. What I've done is put together a timeline of what has been included, which I believe are cultural in nature. So this is the classical part of the exercise, or traditional, in other words, anything pre-1900. So the saris is 2800 to 1800 BCE. The baskets and so forth that we all know are pre-1900. The stained glass windows are pre-1920, and that can go far back. And then we get into the modern intervention timeline, which is the Barcelona chair, which is incorporated into the boardroom, which we'll see a little bit more later. The stained glass windows made in the Mondrian style, and that was done in 1930, and that's developing going forward. Then we get into Art Deco, which is really a follow-up movements from modernism along with arts and crafts and so forth, all trying to get modernism to become something that recognizes individuality and character and place and culture and so forth. The next slide is on the Eiffel chair done by Eames, and this was done in 1951. And the last one is a Panton chair done by Werner Panton, is a Danish furniture maker. All of this furniture, for what it's worth, are very, very good quality knockoffs. Can't afford the brand new stuff. But they're wonderful pieces of work done with the original materials and good quality fabrication. I'd like to talk very quickly about sustainability. That's a huge part of where we are as an office. Almost everything that we do is sustainable, and everything has to be green. Everything has to look green and not just simply become a green star rated building, which could sometimes become a mechanical exercise of showing how this is green, but it's still a glass box. So, we do hands-on testing to make sure that it works. And we try our very best to make it as green as possible and to genuinely reduce the carbon footprint. So in this build, we've introduced photovoltaic cells. This was a big spend, something that we struggled with a bit, but we had to do it because we want to encourage our clients to do this. And this particular battery pack that we put in will give you 12, in excess of 12 hours at night with some discretionary use. But when you have a photovoltaic system like this, and if the sun is shining, then the power is free during the day. But Eskom still has a jump on you. If it's raining, and if Eskom is not load shedding but has a power failure, and that happens so often, then yes, we could be in a bit of trouble. So we need better batteries to store more power for those smart people who are thinking of looking at new business opportunities. I keep telling this to my younger brother who's an electronic engineer, and I'm waiting for him to build a better battery. The next slide talks about rainwater. The first little insert shows you grass blocks, and that's part of the attenuation process that we put into the property, which then goes into a large attenuation tank and then goes out into the street. Now, a lot of people wouldn't do this, and they would consider it, oh, why should I? Because the municipality is supposed to be taking care of this. The truth is, in the end, if we do this and we do it conscientiously, it will reduce the carbon footprint because municipality has to eventually use some kind of carbon footprint to dissipate that storm water. So we're trying to be responsible and we're trying to make sure we attenuate the storm water before it gets out in an actual intended process. The rainwater tanks that I've got on show here are the one on the right-hand side of the slide is coming off the new timber box building with the aluminium roof sheeting on it. Now that aluminium roof sheeting has an antibacterial coatings, and this actually works. All of that water is captured and it goes into these tanks, and we hardly ever filter them. We've not even put in chlorine blocks in them. And it's been almost 4 years now, and that water is used to flush toilets, wash, and so forth. We're still trying to convince people who are working on actually making it potable and drinkable. Time will tell, and eventually it might become more desirable than tap water. The other tank is taking water from the clay tiles. Now, the clay tiles have algae in it, so you're going to get what I call smelly flower vase water, and that water is very difficult to purify. Purification process in it and trying to get rid of the pathogens and the algae and so forth is very difficult, so we restrain that water for all of the garden that's around and the water garden and so forth. The recycled materials is a big part of what we do. I am a salvage hunter. I'm constantly looking for things, constantly buying stuff. Every one of these pots are secondhand, including the plants. We put in the stagon on the tree and it showcases itself against this large wild Amdoni tree. And that's pretty much the biofolia that surrounds this entire property. We've taken the old fences, the old gates, used them as screens, waste not, want not. It is part of that ethos that I learned from my parents. Frugality is the way. Reuse it. It has character. There's no need to go and get a new one. And in this particular case, we've taken plants, planted them into boxes, and allowed them to creep and grow up this fence. They've been struggling recently. There's been a worm in them, and we've treated that, and hopefully it'll start to take off again. Once again, the veranda that we talked about earlier and the recycled burglar guards and the hanging gardens, the louvers are all made from recycled blue, bought in batches, cut into smaller pieces, so we get more use out of them, and clipped onto an aluminium frame. We recycle materials such as the Oregon pine planks, and we've ground them down, clear them out, and reset them into the office again. We repurpose doors, all light fittings, showcase them against each other, trying to bring the old cultural aspects into the building at all points. In this particular case, it's colonial. We've taken, this is that boardroom space that happened in that enclosed veranda above. All of these doors are openable, and you have a direct relationship with the tree. In that particular case, it's a lychee tree. Those leaves grow in between the louvers and they come into the office space. When you bought lychee, you could almost grab them. That's if you could get them before the monkeys got to them. And the baskets are also once again from the San Lucia estuary, and we've converted them into light fittings. The chairs that are on display are the Pantone chairs. Some more recycled materials or recycled things. We've salvaged this old classical bathroom vanity and repurposed them into the old coal stove enclave that used to be there, made that the ladies' toilet. This is an interesting one. My neighbor's property, he's a fencing contractor, and he had a whole lot of old pine, treated pine, lying in his yard, and they had such a beautiful patina about them. I took them across, and it actually cost more to make the frame to showcase them. And this has been up for 4 years as well. And it's just a beautiful way to showcase old things that have been recycled. Pattern making and brickwork and so forth that's happened. We have taken the recycled brick and laid them onto the floors, and that has become our gardener. Blessing took this and he ran with it on his own, and he came up with this pattern, and it's just a wonderful way for him to express himself in his own identity and culture and put in the pattern into the space. There's also brick patterning showing how the bricks have been popped out in the Flemish bond to try and create more patterns. I'm gonna go through the slide again. I think I missed a video. So these are the gardens that have been coming out of this exercise, and it showcases the large timber that I'll talk about in a short while, and its relationship with the greenery around it. More of the same, beautiful pictures showing the relationship of the garden and the large and the lightweight steel structure. Sorry, the video is here. So this is a video just showing pattern making, the brickwork that I've just spoken about in a short while ago. Bear with me. Okay, the next item that I want to talk about is new materials and the reasons for the material choices. So lightweight steel has been touted as a wonderful new material that will solve South Africa's housing crisis that will with quick and efficient and durable buildings. Well, the jury is out there. This exercise is to detail the lightweight steel with a comprehensive ceiling to deal with our coastal conditions. Bear in mind, the large trees in Glenwood do filter the sea spray, so a measured risk was taken. So far, the structure has been perfect. It's worked really well, but we've really spent a lot of time detailing this carefully We've been drawing on all of the walls, making sure that the eaves and the overhangs and the parapets are all very, very well considered in the seal. And let's see how it pans out. I'm going to show you a process of how lightweight steel works for those of you that don't know. Okay, so that's lightweight steel structure. Now, the actual fabric of the lightweight steel structure is galvanized, 0.08 micron galvanized steel, manufactured, I think, Mytech mainly in this country. And this is a framework that's put together, that's been fabricated in a factory and then put onto site and made to fit. Now, the lightweight steel spans very, very long distances. In this particular case, more than 10 meters. And it is still thin galvanized steel, so we need to be very careful as to how you detail it. So if you're ever going to use that, consider very carefully how you detail it and how you make sure that moisture doesn't get into it. What goes around all of the lightweight steel structures is a product called OSB, and that's a wax impregnated chipboard type of structure, and it's quite a durable product. It's wax allows striker screws to go through them, and they fix onto the lightweight steel, and it doesn't allow water in. And then on top of that is a vapor barrier. That vapor barrier is integral to make sure that water is kept on the outside. Now that, in essence, is a structure of lightweight steel. On top of that, you can add in fiber cement board or any finish that you want. In our case, we added in the fiber cement board, plus we put in timber cladding. The fiber cement board will give you a half-hour fire rating. Now, if you may have noticed that this building is right alongside garages, and we needed an hour rating to be compliant. So what we've clipped onto the outside of it is the larch wood. That larch wood will give you another half-hour rating. So it's not just facadism, it's not just cladding on a brick wall. This is very much part of the structure. But the important thing about the wood as well, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, is there needs to be breathing space around it. We did cap it on the top to avoid too much of ingress of water behind it, but there's enough space for the timber to breathe behind it. And the type of wood that was chosen is not a very dense wood, it's large, and we'll talk about this just now. And that's because it weathers well and doesn't warp and bend as much in under wet environments. So that's the lightweight steel. That is one of the new materials, and we're testing it to see how it fares in our urban environment. The next one is talking about Siberian larch. Now, Siberian larch was an interesting choice. The larch came about with a meeting with Lee Hallwell from Buco. Now, the company that did this lightweight steel structure is Showspec, and they worked well with Buco. Now, Buco got word of the bill and got interested. So Lee Hallwell came across and saw us, came with a whole consignment of recycled goods and timber and Oregon pine and so forth. And then we debated what's the best application for this. And in the end, we decided Siberian larch is the best. It's not a very dense wood. The flume and xylem vessels allow it to breathe better, and it's most likely to survive in this environment. But we wanted to also be true to the wood and make sure that we didn't finish it. We don't want to finish it, and we want it to weather on its own. The interesting thing about the larch was Buco had a consignment of this larch in Cape Town. They were bringing in from Cape Town, and when it got to Port Elizabeth, the larch started to bend and warp. So they did the right thing. They called us and said, look, we can't sell this to you. It's a bit unfortunate, but we're not going to drop the ball. We're going to import new Siberian larch from Siberia and bring it into Durban Harbor. So they did that, and they acclimatized it in Durban Harbor and then took it off and stored it in Pinetown for, I think, 4 or 5 months. And then we brought it in to install. And this is the Siberian larch as it was first installed, and the larch as it is today in the roof garden. And that larch takes a beating in the west sun, but it will age well. It will get better with time. It has a beautiful gray, dark gray patina, sometimes light gray, and when it rains, it gets a really dark gray. It still looks almost the same as it did when we first installed it, even though it takes such a beating from the west sun. A few of the planks have lovingly kicked. It's not too offensive. And with time, I believe in 20 years, more will kick. And at that point, we may consider leaving it. And I'll talk about why that's not a bad idea in the next few slides. Or we could replace it. But that would always be recycled and reused again. It would just be stunning forever. So this is an elevation showing much of the same and how that full gray box has evolved to today with all of the patina and showcase. The same has happened to the blue fences and gates that also recycled wood. Another little video on the boardroom. Now this is where I want to talk about wabi-sabi. Now wabi-sabi is a concept in minimalism. It is in essence the acceptance of imperfect, impermanent, incomplete. So everything has a life cycle, but will never be complete. It may start perfect, maybe. It will age and then it will die. The materials, if of good quality and good workmanship is put together, it will age well. And I think that's the important thing that I'm trying to bring across is that it must age well. It doesn't just have to look good for now. And that is, for me, what wabi-sabi is all about. It's just that celebration of imperfection. And I have to thank Nathan Iyer for introducing me to that, to identify this thing that I was doing with recycled stuff. The project embraces age, patina, character, and acknowledges that it will transition over time and eventually come down. The materials can be recycled again in some way or another to enjoy the patina in time. Let me show you a little bit snippet of this. So this was a piece of timber that was found in a lumber yard in Assagai, and we immediately fell in love with it. We said, all right, we got to have it. We took it, brought it back to the office, and we put it on site, and this boardroom table was flattened in situ, flattened down by our own resident artisan. It just did an amazing job flattening and then putting in some Rockstar keys in between it to hold the planks together. It's just turned out absolutely stunning. More pictures of it, and it's so beautiful even from the underside that I might have to take a shot of it. You might want to take a nap during your lunch breaks underneath there. It's just a wonderful piece of wood. And the ubiquitous nature of this wood and the sustainable nature of it is what makes it so beautiful. And the idea of keeping it as natural as possible is what this whole wabi-sabi concept is all about. And we believe it will age with time and it will look better with time and it will just improve. So this is the other building, the building that we're currently squatting in, my family and I, until we finish the new build. But we are slowly working our way across to it, and the front yard has now become part of the office environment. You wouldn't know that we're living in there unless you were told, but most people would just assume that it's another office building. Most of the work that needs to happen happens in the back. So it's still working very well as a residence and an office together. And then that's good in terms of the courtyard type of architecture. So we get to both experiences, but still have different identities and separation in spaces. But the full potential of courtyard architecture will only be realized once that courtyard is complete. And as I explained, we can't start that just yet, but in the next few months, we want to complete it. Some work that we did in that particular union building. This is the loft upstairs. 15 years ago, this is what it looked like. And I did some remodeling. I introduced a bottom cord and a king post into it and opened up the space, very, very little intervention, just to showcase that beautiful volume. And this is what it looks like today. So it's very ubiquitous materials, and there has been some cracks and movements in it, but it still works and we're quite happy and it has a lot of character to it. Space is a lot more clutter 15 years later. And that's our daughter sitting in there doing some of her homework. So this is the courtyard architecture, the courtyard that's going to be built up in that space. So this is a concept design of what's going to happen into the future. Okay, so that courtyard, as I explained earlier, this is what it looks like at night now, and this is what it looks like in the day now, and that's what it's going to look like in the next few months. We'll open up the space, we'll start to link that courtyard and that tree into this eating area. It's a cafe of sorts. That pond or the pool at the moment will then be converted to a pond. And that's another learning curve that we will go through to understand how to take care of aquariums like that. And this is where it is at the moment. So I think I'd like to bring my talk to an end. I think I'm okay for time there, Skura.
Yes, absolutely, Summers. I'm just trying to get my video on there.
Hang on, sorry, there's one more video that I can show. This is something
Okay,
I'm
no,
gonna
that's
do
cool.
together. And it's just a very quick video showcasing the entire precinct.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you for that. Thomas, let me start with the other works that I guess you haven't spoken much about, apart from the residence and the office. I'll come to that, but I wanted to find out, being a practitioner, starting off in your practice, you already had a practice before this one after South Foster. I wanted to find out, do you feel that taking over a practice with a particular history, taking over that, redefining it, and all of that, do you feel that it assisted? Would you recommend to someone who's starting off in architecture to do that?
Look, if the opportunity presents itself, I would certainly recommend it. It's not common that you'd find synergy between people, but if you can find an office that is wanting to transition and the partners are of a certain age, it's difficult sometimes to close a practice because you have to keep work coming in and you've got to keep paying staff, and then it's more difficult to do that and then try and stop, and then you end up having to spend more money than you're making at some stage. So it actually is a good fit if a young practitioner wants to come in and take over a practice or help with the practice. It's a good starting point. Also, you get the benefit of advice and age and guidance
and experience, I guess. The company profile is quite established and all of that.
Yeah, it is.
All right. And then another thing, Thomas, there are two things that were that I wanted to talk to you about. The one is submission to local authority, which you touched on a bit in terms of the fire with the new materials. And another one is AMAFA. Obviously, when you're putting screens there, it's something that can be reversed by someone else. So I assume that it may not have been a problem. But what was your process? What was your challenges? AMAFA submissions versus the Tegwini. Now this is now for your office and your residence there.
Well, I think the biggest challenge was converting them into offices or getting special consent. And Mike Khan, who did the town planning for the area, assisted us with that. And one of the huge motivations was the historic precinct and the preservation of that. So we wanted the buildings to remain and not be taken down in the future and put up a block of flats and so forth. So we've specifically chosen the route of special consent and not just rezoning, so that if somebody else buys it in the future, they don't just take it down and put up a block of flats. The idea is to try and retain the history of these buildings. The third building, which is my neighbor's property, is falling apart. It is a listed building. It's a bit sad, but it's important that that building is also retained going to the future. So yeah, the whole motivation for getting the special consent was probably the most challenging of them all. AMAFA wasn't so much of a problem. We motivated it along these lines, and they were very happy to go along with it.
Okay, and then in council?
No, we didn't have any problems with council. At that stage, it was okay. The only real problem we had was it was transitioning from hard copy submissions to the online submissions. So it was one of the first few projects that went through that. But once they got the systems in place, it actually came through without any referrals. So that was quite good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that. So much quite detailed. I think I like how the new intervention brings texture and character in the street there. So well done. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions or comments for Thomas? I don't find it very offish, by the way, so much for you to have thought of being a civil engineer, because you are a very rational thinker. You served at the institute with as a chair of the finance, and it needs somebody who's very rational. You are great as an architect, but you would have made equally as good an engineer, I think.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'd like to think I've got that fair split between the left and right brain. So
yeah, no, great. No questions for Summers?
Summers, can I have a go, please, Skura?
Okay.
First of all, Summers, well done. I applaud your concerns about things natural, and particularly your concerns about vegetation. I think that's terrific. Well done. However, does your place not feel a little bit like a second-hand shop with all your bits and pieces? Anyway, that's a bit of a dig. But tell me, how do you square your concerns about sustainability with the importation of Siberian larch and balu? And I really, what sounds me is the continuing suspicion and concern among our architectural community about the use of pine and eucalypt from South Africa. Why did you choose larch over pine? I have got, my place is clad in pine, pine cladding, which I put up in 2012, soon after I got down here. It stood up to the western sun, the sea air within 300 meters of the beach. It works perfectly well. Why are you looking at foreign timbers that require such distant transport, as opposed to even African timbers? What about Aframasia? What about Iroko? What about Shamfuta? Have you considered those timbers for external use? That's the one thing. The other thing is, I'm also a little bit concerned about your use of lightweight steel. You're not that far from the sea. Why did you choose steel framework as opposed to timber framework for your construction? 2 questions. Thanks, Summers.
Okay, so the first question, the issue of balu. Balu that we've used is already secondhand, so they were recycled already. So the carbon footprint of manufacturing them and use has already been done. So that's why we chose the balu for the louvers and so forth. The Siberian larch was chosen because of its ability to weather the storms. Now, I understand what you're talking about in terms of the pine, but which pine did you use, Ken? Is it the treated pine or the H3 or H2 pine?
No, I only use H3 treated pine.
Treated pine. So
it's treated pine, and it's produced locally. Transport is down to a minimum. It uses local labor. It does everything, and it ticks all the right boxes locally. Whereas the stuff that you're bringing in, it's got a huge carbon footprint, surely.
Okay, so I tried to avoid using too much of the treated pine and so forth, just to try and keep the chemical components out of it. But one of the primary reasons is because the way the flume and xylem vessels work and the way it would breathe and work in this environment. But I am curious, the pine hasn't moved at all in the environment that you put it in?
I'll send you some pictures of it. Put up in 2012. I've got pine cladding on the outside of the building. I did it because I converted an old building that had been crashed and bashed around, and the external plasterwork wasn't fantastic. I also put in a significant number of windows, crashed holes. So instead of putting sort of completely replastering it and putting in a very expensive paint coating, I decided to try timber cladding, which are spaced away from the wall. I also reckon that it's also helping with the heat treatment. It acts like a radiator on my walls. But the pine itself is still fine. I've got pine louvers all over the place. I do, though, I must say that I do seal it with a penetrating sealer on a fairly regular basis. Every 3 to 4 years, I have in fact given it a coat of sealer. But it's worked perfectly okay, and it's cheap. And it creates local labor.
It's actually a very good option. I was actually considering using pine in another build, even in this one for that matter. I would probably use a 38 mil pine and treat it with fire, the Shosugi bond method, and remove about 5 mils of that burn stuff around it, and then that just seals the timber properly, and then you don't have to seal it again. But it has to be a fairly thick piece of pine for that to work. So it's something I will consider going forward. But it's interesting. I'd like to come and see your
consider the charred pine as well. I've got a charred panel, which has been there for about 7 or 8 years, and it's been fine. Been okay. It's my own experiment. Okay. there's not enough experimentation, architecture experimentation, I'm afraid, within our profession. But
Well,
there we
that
go.
answers my second question that you asked is why did I use lightweight steel? Now, this has been touted as an amazing new product that's going to be used throughout South Africa. Now, it's not new. I mean, it's used all over the world. But we have our coastal conditions in here. So I wanted to test it in here for two reasons. I wanted to have a large span without columns in between, and I needed to transfer that load onto existing foundations. I didn't want to add new foundations, especially in the existing building. So it needed to be as light as possible, a lightweight steel structure, no columns in between, and it gave us an opportunity to test the durability of this product if you seal it properly in our environment. So it's an experiment as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Thomas. Thank you, Ken. Looks like Ken owes us a talk. Thank you so much, so much. So much. I feel like the soul and the passion that you've put in creating your work experience. So your work, the work environment there is something that I feel that your office is something that they would appreciate. I certainly appreciate it when I was there. I haven't seen that minimalist ceiling. I must pay you a visit again and see everything that has gone that has happened there. Another person from your office is here, Adima.
Hi, Adima.
How's it? No, not an interrogation, I promise, Thomas. But
Okay.
maybe just a commendation on the discussion, and the evident need for more discussions like this in terms of understanding the necessity to engage with settler colonial architecture at large. I won't credit it to any grounds. But I think it's a really important and really interesting project for the context that we're in, and it sets a really interesting departure point, I think, for a lot of people in this kind of transitory nature that we find ourselves in. So just a commendation, and a nice to see the progress on a space that was quite important along my own architectural journey for some time. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Adima. You must come visit us again.
Just thank you for the discussion and solidarity conversations like this. Thanks.
Thank you, Adima. Thank you so much. So much. My parting shot, I think, is what the Africa Union of Architects has been trying to do over the years was look at sustainability without the sustainability consultant, if you like, the Green Star rating person. Because as soon as you tell your client, this is our fee in terms of the percentage, and then we have to add a particular percentage for a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, whoever has developed themselves to do that rating for the Green Building Society, then your clients tend to run away. But we always have to be cognizant of basic things that make a building sustainable without getting another professional. And we had floods recently in KZN. And as soon as we had floods, you could not actually have water. You had to buy water for food, but the bulk of water for flushing and stuff, you did not have it. It was difficult in a lot of areas. And so to have water tanks like that, so much, I know exactly how it works and know exactly how it helped me to have water like that you pump into your system, for example. So you have used very basic methods of sustainability that we all have to be aware of, we all have to use, without even a consultant coming through from outside. So I do think that you've put so much soul in your work, and I hope that people working in that precinct appreciate that. I know that you are very close to your heart, and so well done from my side. Thank you so much for your presentation. Your parting shot.
Thank you, Skura. I really appreciate your words. It means a lot.
Do you have anything else to say before we?
No, thank you for the opportunity once again, and I hope that I conveyed something of meaningful There's two people around. Got you all up at 7:30 this morning. So appreciate your time and appreciate this opportunity to showcase what we've done. I'd also like to say thank you to Amar in the office who stressfully put this together. And I know he's given it his best, and I'm happy with the presentation as it's turned out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you to your staff. You've one person who brought in your stuff like that in a talk like this.
Okay.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. May you have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Gura. Bye,
Cheers,
everybody.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Summers. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Wally.